Quay, bonjour, hello, Dia Yiva Horja agus Gwynna Ushla. My name is Dr. Frances Scully, and today is Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. I just checked the date. Sorry. And I'm in a mad hurry because I have to leave. I should be in my clinic in a few minutes. So I'm just doing a very quick recording here before I leave. Now, what's with the languages? Well, Quay, as far as I know, is how to greet people in the beautiful Mi'kmaq language. And I live in a fabulous place called Logie Bay, on the outskirts of St. John's on an island called Katamkatuk in Mi'kmaq. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Any problems with my Mi'kmaq is all my bad, as my son would say, my young son would say. And again, I want to give a shout out to the wonderful Halabu Band for providing online Mi'kmaq courses, which I started during the lockdowns, and to my wonderful Mi'kmaq teacher, Dean Simon, incredible person, and all the resources and everything, fascinating. Now, one of the reasons I was doing this, well, first of all, I'm a big no, I can't. Sorry, people. I cannot call myself a settler because originally my ancestry. Well, first of all, I don't know a lot about my ancestry. I'm adopted, right? So I don't know much. But what I have been told, or what I understand, is that my biological mother was an Irish Roman Catholic nurse named Bridget Frances Curran, who's now passed away, and sadly we never connected in her lifetime. Hopefully we are all members of the Communion of Saints, and somehow this will all work out sometime. I don't know, but anyway, I wish her well. Thank you. And I'm sorry. I'm sure you suffered, Bridget. I'm sure you suffered terribly during your pregnancy with me, and you fled to hide in Belfast, where I was born, because in 1956. There was, and to this day in most parts of the world, there's a dreadful stigma around girls or women becoming pregnant outside of marriage. And it's just a huge thing and strange. It's so strange. It's so weird, particularly, I just don't understand it myself because... I'm definitely a Christian, but my version of Christianity kind of coincides with, I think, maybe some of sort of like what Bishop Pham is talking about in Los Angeles now. And I hope what Pope Leo the 14th talks about, although with all the AI videos of Leo the 14th, some of which I accidentally reposted, who knows? Because that's the problem. We now have to add to all the other things that cause confusion in our little lives. We have artificial intelligence, and we have all these people making up really fake news. So we have a felon in the White House who talked about fake news for years, because anything that didn't go along with his lies, felon Trump announced was fake news. So it's all very confusing, right? And it's got much worse since he came on the scene. And this is why, darlings, Peter Thiel, if you're listening, sweetheart, Peter Thiel, you say you're a Christian. Well, I think have another look at that. See, maybe, I don't know who your spiritual advisors are now, but there are some really good ones. There are lots of really good ones. And, so maybe rethink what you're doing, Peter Thiel, with your Palantir. And, perhaps rethink whoever has explained the book of Revelations to you. I hope you do know that there are scriptural scholars in good standing who maintain that John, who wrote the book of Revelations, apparently lived on the island of Patmos, and that he was describing in that book it's all very allegorical. And he was describing the absolute horror, heinous suffering that which Roman general? I used to know them off the top of my head, but I can't think right now. But the brutal Roman general and troops inflicted. I mean, Roman generals and their troops inflicted absolute brutal misery on all sorts of people for centuries, and they specialized in brutality and cruelty, and they started invading. It's very tricky to know what to call the area that is so disputed in our times. And I think that area has often been disputed. And of course, this is a problem all around our planet. There's been an awful lot of disputed territories, and an awful lot of horrible things have happened to people all over our beautiful, beautiful planet. And let me just stand back here and say, I do not think any of this is the will of God. At least I have no intention ever of worshipping a God, a holy God, that wants to inflict suffering on people. All right? I don't see the point. I don't like suffering. Yeah, okay, let's get right to the core of the things. Yeah, I'm in my late 60s. I was born in 1956. I went to medical school at the age of 17. I devoted decades to doing everything I possibly could to become the best medical doctor I could. I trained in internal medicine, in pediatrics, then in pediatric hematology, oncology, hematopathology, and then adult hematology. And I worked as an attending at the St. John Regional Hospital under the name Dr. Marie-France Scully, or Dr. Mary Frances Scully, between 1992. And then I left there in 1997, and I started at the Health Sciences Centre, which is where I'm supposed to be right now. and as initially an assistant professor at Memorial Medical School in 1997. And I managed to get to become an associate professor at Memorial Medical School. And you can look me up online under Dr. Mary Frances Scully. But all that fell apart for all sorts of reasons. And my wonderful, darling, beautiful late husband, Dr. Dio Nguyen, was a refugee from Vietnam who was eternally grateful to Canada, to Pierre Trudeau and his Liberals, and to Canadians for rescuing my husband, Dio, and 7 of his siblings who left Vietnam, as I understand it, on the deck of a Korean warship. My husband was age 17, and I think he did some older siblings with him, and then younger siblings. And anyway, they left on the deck of a Korean warship a day before the fall of Saigon in 1975. Now, I was born in 1956 in Belfast. I was very lucky. I was adopted by Maura Kathleen Scully, a darling, and James Diarmid Scully, another darling, into a tiny little family. And Maura's best friend was Peggy Fitzpatrick, and Peggy had been Peggy Scully, and she was Dermot's only sister. And Maura and Peggy were best friends for years. So my mother, Maura, married her best friend's only brother, Dermot, and they were all thick as thieves, and they were lovely people, all of them. Much better than me. Very kind, saintly, wonderful Irish Roman Catholics, the best types of Roman Catholics. Very, very gentle and loving and fun, and very good to anybody they could possibly help. and animals, and they loved animals, and they loved having fun. And they were wonderful, wonderful people. And my mother's only brother, Patsy Devine, was also a darling, and he married my beautiful aunt, Auntie Pat. And God bless her, Auntie Pat. I have to find out where we are now, what the dates are and everything. But I think she's 99 this year. And I'm hoping at some point to get back over to London and to see my Auntie Pat and my beautiful, beautiful English cousins, all of whom I love dearly. But between, all the things in life, we don't meet up very often. And the last time I was in that part of the world, I don't know what was, I think COVID was whatever was going on. I had reached out to see if there was any way I was traveling probably to Dublin, where I have a family, or to Bonneau in France, because in Bonneau, well, there's two Bonneaus in France, by the way, but the one near Poitiers is where there's a beautiful l'Abbaye de Bonneau, and that is now the head of the World Community of Christian Meditation, and it is a beautiful, beautiful, peaceful place. So if any of you need a break, doesn't matter if you're not Catholic and you're not, well, certainly doesn't matter if you're not Catholic, because the World Community of Christian Meditation is super ecumenical, but it also doesn't matter if you're not Christian, really. It's a beautiful place, and the community there are fabulous. And the director is Father Lawrence Freeman. I think he has a new book out now, and he's a wonderful person. And I don't want to say too much, but he's had a lot of illness this year, and I'm hoping to God he's doing well now. But he's a darling, Father Lawrence Freeman. And the original founder of the World Community of Christian Meditation was Father John Main. And Father John Main grew up in Ireland, and he ended up, so this is the whole thing. Whether we're talking about the Israelis and the Palestinians, the Ukrainians and the Russians, the Irish and the English, the Chinese and the Vietnamese, or the Chinese and Tibetans, whatever, the Quebecois and the people in New Brunswick, whatever, Canada and the US. Ultimately, tough as it is, we humans are all interconnected. We are all members of the same terribly messy, massive human family. Now, does this fill my heart with joy? Not really, because there are lots of members of our lovely big human family who terrify the life out of me. And to be fair, to be candid, I'm easily intimidated. Let me tell you, it's really quite easy to shut me up in public, for many reasons. First of all, I was educated as an Irish Roman Catholic girl, so of course I was taught from being knee-high to the grasshopper that I had to be good. Doon the veil, I had to be good. I had to be very careful what I said. I had to please people. I had to keep people happy. I had to be nice to people. And actually, I like all these things. I like being nice to people. I like being kind. And I would like to be wise about what I say in public. One challenge is that at the age in 2017, I was formally diagnosed for the first time. Can you imagine? 2017, yeah, I was almost 61. I was 60, and I was formally diagnosed with hyperfocus attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what's so cute about that is my beautiful late husband, Dr. Dio Namian, who I met in Toronto in 1987. So Dio was at the time completing his residency in internal medicine at St. Michael's Hospital, a beautiful hospital downtown Toronto. and he was doing great. And he was, of course, very handsome and charming and lovely. So I fell for him like a ton of bricks. And then, uh, and I was in Toronto, not planning to stay. I came to Toronto because I followed the advice of beautiful Professor Neil O'Donoghue. No, yeah, O'Donoghue. And unfortunately, I never got to thank that man in life. He was a beautiful man. And if any of his family ever hear of this, wonderful, wonderful man. He was a pediatric neurologist, and I had the honour of working for him at Harker Street Children's Hospital. Unfortunately, a lot of the hospitals I trained in Dublin no longer exist, which is a bit nerve-wracking. And but they did exist. I actually walked past Harker Street when I was back in Dublin recently and looked to see if there was a plaque or anything, if I could make out which of those houses had contained the Harker Street Children's Hospital, and just walking along, I couldn't see it quickly, so I gave up because I was supposed to go somewhere. But anyway, I did train for a while at Harker Street Children's Hospital, and one of my mentors there was the beautiful, wonderful Professor Niall O'Donoghue, and he was a wonderful pediatric neurologist who trained in Britain, and he wrote, I think, maybe the first authoritative book, I don't know, but certainly he was a pioneer in studying how to best manage epilepsy in children, and he wrote a book on that. And as a result of that, he was invited to give grand rounds, like these pediatric lectures in children's hospitals right across Canada. And he came back from that, and he knew that I wanted to train as a pediatric hematologist oncologist. And he said to me, you should apply to Canada. It's a wonderful country, and they've the best healthcare system in the world. This was back in the early 1980s. And what I knew about Canada could be on a postage stamp. I had been thinking I would go and train in Great Ormond Street. I'd sort of visited there, hadn't worked there. I had been fortunate enough through Annette Gill and her late husband, whose name I can't think of now. Her husband was a professor somewhere, and they had arranged for me to come as a student to an elective to the Ladywood Children's Hospital in Birmingham, a wonderful hospital. And that's when I was a medical student. And that's where I met, and I can't find out the name of the person I met, but it was a woman who was a pediatric hematologist and very involved with the United Kingdom childhood leukemia trials. And I met her when I was a student, and I was really impressed with her. And I was delighted that all these people were trying to cure leukemia in children. Leukemia is cancer of the blood in children, and it is the commonest type of cancer in children. And it's a horrible illness, and there has been a lot of progress, but there's a need for a lot more progress because the treatments are more and more effective, but they're also very toxic. So it's very difficult for those children and all the people who love them, and their families and friends and teachers and everybody, and for all the wonderful people, researchers, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, social workers, who got left out, physios, OTs, all the wonderful people who work in healthcare and try and help children affected with cancer. Great, great cause, dear to my heart. Anyway, I had thought I would go and study in Great Ormond Street because my wonderful cousins, an aunt and uncle in London, but sure, when Professor Niall O'Donoghue suggested Toronto, I somehow got the address of Hospital of Sick Children, and I applied. And lo and behold, they offered me a position in January. And in those days, this is back in the 1980s, we used to apply in June for our positions for July. And so getting an offer of a position in January for July the 1st was like a miracle. So of course I said, well, what I did was I immediately phoned my best friend, Eileen O'Driscoll, because Eileen for years was getting married to her wonderful husband, Tommaso Cullinall, or Tom Collins. and every year things were changed because of the hay and the harvest and different things. And so we were getting ready for this wedding for years. And I phoned Eileen and I said, "Dear God, Eileen, don't tell me you're getting married this summer." And she said, "Yes, I am." So I was stuck going to Toronto. And sure enough, like as soon as I got to Toronto, I was asking if I could get time off in August, and that did not go over well. So by the end of my first month, I was told that they'd had funding for 10 fellows for 2 years, and they lost funding for one, and I was cut. So anyway, that's another story. We'll get to that sometime. But meantime, yes, where are we? Yes, now I have to leave. But what I'm doing here is, yes, I'm saying Quay because thanks to the Halapu band, so anyway, years later, I really discovered the marvelous CBC Massey lectures, and I recommend that to everybody. The CBC Massey lectures. You can find the audios online, and then so CBC Massey lectures. I think they started in 1961. So I don't know who the people are. I've nothing to do with it, but it's great. And they search for people who are really good thinkers, leaders, and they get them to give talks, and they're wonderful talks, and they create a book out of them. And there's something called the House of Anansi Press, and they produce the books. The first one I came across, and still my favorite, well, there's competition now between a few, but one of my all-time favorite books is The Wayfinders, which was by Wade Davis, who's a Canadian Colombian polymath. And if you don't know Wade Davis, the Canadian Colombian polymath, be warned, because when I Googled recently, there's another Wade Davis, and he's linked somehow to the Trump family. So I was wondering, was that the Wade Davis that I follow? And I was waiting to see why, but there's two of them anyway. So, and they both speak Spanish, so it's confusing. But Wade Davis, the one I'm talking about, who's Canadian Colombian, is a polymath, meaning there's nothing that man can't do. And you can find his talks all over the internet, and he's given talks. He's an anthropologist. He was on staff, I think, the National Geographic. He's an explorer. He's certainly an author, speaker, scientist, teacher, mentor, filmmaker. Like, the man does everything. Brilliant. But The Wayfinders, I highly recommend. And out of all this, now other people came up with the idea. I think it was a Finnish woman noted that there is a very close correlation between the use of Indigenous languages and the loss of Indigenous languages, which is happening at a heartbreaking rate, and the loss of biodiversity, and quite possibly tolerance. I'm going to have to go now. I was actually planning to talk about something totally different, but that's what happens. I'm just explaining here that the reason I say Quay is that I think supporting Indigenous languages, whether it's Mi'kmaq or Inuit or Inuaman or all the other beautiful languages spoken by the nations, members of the nations, First Nations and Métis across Canada and the United States and New Zealand, the Maoris, all these people. But also, I would suggest to all these people, that there were also Indigenous languages in Europe, such as the Irish language, Gaeilge, or the Scottish language, Gaelic, the Welsh language, and I don't know how to say that in Welsh, the Manx language from the Isle of Man, and the Cornish language. And in the late 16th century, I discovered recently, 4,000 Cornish people were massacred because they were objecting to being forced to read their Bible in English instead of Cornish. And the language sort of died and is being revived now. And so, going way, 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 way back to the Romans, what has happened repeatedly for thousands of years now is that very aggressive, brutal, military-minded people believe in empires, and they believe in their right to, invade, take over other places. And the Romans weren't the first by any means, but they're the ones I'm sort of most familiar with, along with somewhat with the Greeks. And the Greeks and the Romans were very intertwined in their imperial ambitions. And of course, the person that is, in my mind, really incorrectly lauded is Aristotle, who was the tutor to poor young traumatized Prince Philip, and who got that poor young man so brainwashed that by the age of 19 he took off, and he was a brilliant soldier and a great leader and very successful in battle, but he spent his whole life in battle in misery, and then died at a very young age and was quite possibly poisoned by somebody. So not a happy story, I don't think. And I think so I don't view Aristotle as a great mentor at all. That's just my personal view. But anyway, meantime, back in AD 70, probably affecting either the second or third generation of Jewish people who had been followers of the beautiful, beautiful rabbi that I would know as our Lord Jesus. Most of them were all massacred because I think it was Titus. Anyway, so basically there was a siege in Jerusalem, and it's estimated by Flavius, was the person who survived and then wrote about this, like something like 900,000. Can you imagine 900,000 Jewish men, and God knows how many children and women were all massacred by these awful, brutal Roman soldiers, and 2,000 of them were crucified and strung up around the temple in Jerusalem, and the whole temple was then set on fire. Now, apparently, the general, whoever he was, I'd have to look it up. It's all there. You can look at all this up in Encyclopedia Britannica online, by the way. It's all there now. And he didn't want them setting fire to the temple. I'm not sure what that was about. But anyway, so part of it was that they, the Romans wanted everybody to worship their standard bearers or whatever. And anyway, in my personal view, our problem is that the Roman worshipped, to me, a horrible god called Mars, who was very destructive, the god of war, and who allowed all sorts of brutality and sadism and all this sort of thing. And, things like, and he's very related to, like, the Greek god of war, yucky gods. And I think that's the problem. Like, there's no, holy, sacred God, the God of mercy and creativity and compassion and wisdom, is the God of diversity and equity and regeneration and love and beauty, is totally, and scholarship and science and all the good things, is very different than this yucky god Mars. And I think this is where we're all screwed up. Anyway, I'm late. I'm going now, and sorry about this because it's very all over the place, but there you go.